I mentioned earlier about this idea that what really freaks people out about public speaking is this thought that,
Welcome to the show, Vince Stevenson.
it's a pleasure to be here.
I'm happy to have you. So, why do you think public speaking is an important skill for people to learn?
Well, first of all, if you want to achieve anything in leadership and management, you probably need to be a good communicator. That is going to involve a lot of meetings, a lot of presentations, a lot of formal discussions and informal discussions with your friends, colleagues, and staff. So, if you want to stand out, being a good communicator is one of the best ways you can go about it.
So, what can people do to better position themselves in that leadership role and with their colleagues in, or just friends and family with their public speaking skills?
I think something that I learned very quickly was, so first of all, I was a decent footballer when I was a young man, and one I used to go to football very regularly. I'd hardly ever missed a training session, for example. And one day the manager said to me, he said he's going to be away next week, and he needed somebody to run the training session, and would that be me? And I kind of wanted to run a mile away from that. But he said to me, look, he said, Vince, you're a regular. You're nearly always here. You're the most enthusiastic person we've got in the team. Everybody likes you. Everybody respects you. If they won't listen to you, they won't listen to anybody. So I gave it a go. I'm not going to suggest it was great, but because we were talking about football and I knew all of the drills inside out, it went okay. And that gave me some confidence. But my first professional speech in front of the board of the co-op in 1984 was an absolute meltdown. Had a terrible panic attack, profuse sweating, clammy hands, tightness and dryness in the throat. What else? Increased heartbeat, butterflies. I think I probably went purple as well, but I didn't have an iPhone to capture that, so I'm not quite sure, but I probably did. So I had the whole legion of panic attack symptoms. So yeah, it doesn't get much worse than that when it happens professionally. But again, I'd love to say that I have one very strong personal attribute, and that is intelligence. Unfortunately, it's not intelligence, it's just sheer dogged determination. And I always knew that if I wanted to get on in the leadership and management, I was going to have to crack public speaking. So I went, after that terrible incident, I went away, tail between my legs, and I worked and I worked and I worked and I got lucky and I worked and I got lucky and I got lucky and I worked and I got lucky and lucky and luckier. I think the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Would you say public speaking was kind of bestowed upon you, or it was given to you as a, I'm not sure which word to use, but it was my point of view, it's from how you've described it, it's more like you were assigned this, that's the word, you were assigned this role in life. Would you agree
Mm-hmm.
with that, or would you say
Well, I'm going to say looking back, possibly so, but at the time it didn't feel like that because I genuinely had a very, very profound dislike of it. I knew that I'd had a panic attack. I went to the doctor. The doctor explained everything to me, and my thought was, how can I go about not having another one of those situations where you can't catch your breath, you feel like you're dying, you can't breathe properly. It's a really horrible experience. So again, the doctors taught me through some breathing exercises. When I moved to London, I started going to theatre workshops as like a small theatre just down the road from where I live. And on Monday nights, I used to go there, and we would play with the voice on the stage. And again, you have a lot of fun. You make some friends. I didn't know anybody when I moved to London. The first reason I went was to make some friends locally. But what I noticed was that we were doing text reading and some improvisation, and suddenly what seemed like a huge burden had been lifted by going through these exercises. I think the first thing I need to explain to everybody is that public speaking is a skill. It's like driving a car. Obviously, it's not like driving a car. I'm using that as an analogy. But there's only one way you're going to get good at driving a car, and that's by practicing what works. And that's what I teach in my public speaking lessons. We practice what works. If you don't practice what works, you just get better at getting worse. So we practice what works. So I've got some really good case studies of very good speakers, and I show these speakers to my students, and we look at what they're doing, and we look at what they could do differently and or better. And generally, they all receive very good marks. The speakers receive good marks from the students. So that suggests that they're doing something that they feel is really valuable. So then I say, well, look, let's try and emulate these people. But most of the time, public speaking is very much a reductive exercise. And what I mean by that is when you stop doing the things that don't work, what's generally left is a decent speaker. There's a lot of things. So if I'm sniffing and scratching my head here, you're going to get a very unpleasant feeling about me and my manners, and you're not going to enjoy this conversation. But you see people doing this, and it's totally involuntary. They don't even know that they're doing these things. But when they do, and this is why the camera's a great diagnostic tool. So we video speeches, we play them back, and people can see what's working and what's not working compared to what we were talking about at the case studies. And when we, like I say, I just feel it's very much a reductive exercise. And when we remove all the things that don't work, what's left generally is a half decent speaker. And the nice thing is when you feel that you've got rid of most of those idiosyncrasies, if that doesn't boost your confidence, nothing will. And that's the big issue, I think, with public speaking, confidence. It's like if you're not very good at dating is always going to be a chore. You're not very good at driving is always going to be, and you're probably not going to enjoy certainly driving around without your license on your own. I'm not suggesting anybody should, but like anything that involves a skill, it's like being a chef. There's only one way you're going to become a good chef, and that's by practicing what works. And it's exactly the same as public speaking.
What would you say most people get wrong about their public speaking? If like you said, with getting rid of all the stuff that doesn't work, what
Yeah.
is that stuff that doesn't work?
What's the stuff that doesn't work?
Yeah.
But there's lots of them. So, like I say, sniffing, scratching, playing with your hair, playing with earrings, necklaces, rings, hand wringing, hands in front of your, say nether regions, hands behind your back, hands on hips. What else have we got? Steepling. This is a good one. This is a good one not to do. Steepling.
So not
Yeah.
okay.
So we do this one a lot, and this is what we call the holier than now position. It's like I know what
like
I'm in a position of authority, yeah, and you must listen and shut up, that sort of thing. So if you ever did that body language during a job interview, you'd probably be kicked out. But you certainly would be with me.
So I found that quite funny.
I can be funny occasionally. About twice a year.
Well, hopefully I haven't used them up. What do you focus on improving with other people's public speaking? If it's a lot of body language stuff that they should not do, what is the body language people should have to convey that they're good at public speaking?
It's really simple. First of all, a strong posture, just standing up straight is very important. You have a muscle just here below. If you point to that place where your ribs meet, this is where your solar plexus is, and you've got a muscle called the diaphragm. That's the dynamic end of your lungs, and that really has a big impact on the quality of your vocal delivery. And if it's not properly supported, you're never really going to let the voice fly. So standing up straight, I think the enemy of the speaker is tension. If you're holding any tension, particularly in your upper body, this is where all of your vocal apparatus resides. So if you've got tension in the upper body, that's going to have a detrimental impact on the quality of your vocal delivery. So we do posture, breathing, relaxation exercises. Again, just 5 minutes or so. And if people go home and do these exercises, one, it's going to be good for your breathing. Breathing is everything in public speaking. If you can't breathe effectively, public speaking is always going to be a massive bind for you. So we spend a lot of time working on breathing, so breath support, hydration, being properly hydrated. If you're 2 to 3% dehydrated, that can affect your concentration by up to 30%. You've seen those signs on motorways, tightness kills, take a break. So when you're speaking, like I'm speaking now, you want to be properly hydrated. That will give you every chance that your neurons are all going to fire synchronously.
I'm getting the impression that public speaking, to be good at it, it's anything but the actual speaking itself, because you're saying about the posture, the breathing, what not to do.
Okay,
Would you say I?
yeah, I think you're on the right track. I think let me just try and clarify that. I think there's the delivery side, so good posture, good breathing, good body language. That's really important. Everybody's got to do that. Everybody needs to know what works with in terms of body language, breathing, posture. Your facial expression says a massive amount about what you're thinking and feeling in that moment. And if you look downcast or upset or disappointed, that sends a signal to your audience, and it's not the right signal that they want to be receiving. So there's two aspects. There's the body language, posture, facial expression, hand movements, all that sort of side. But then there's the message. The message is actually what the audience came for. Through good body language and breathing, that will help you deliver the message that the audience came for.
Is it true that if you, with the message side of things, that if you can make the audience laugh, you've automatically won them and it doesn't matter about the message? Because I've heard that from someone where you can have a debate, like in a public speaking setting, and person A might say all the logical stuff which makes sense, but person B gets 3 laughs and they're the one who wins the debate? Or is that just...
I'd love to say that was true. In my experience, like I said, I've worked for big banks. I've worked for very big energy companies. I've been running my own companies for 35 years now. And humor's great, but it's down towards the bottom end of the list. Value is at the top of the list. Okay? If this podcast doesn't deliver any value, nobody's going to want to watch it. Full stop. Okay? Smiles, jokes, whatever, they're not going to hang around hoping Vince is going to tell a funny. They've got better things to do. So I think humor's good. It's a nice light relief for the audience. Again, it certainly can calm some people feel like, if they can get a good joke out, it makes them feel a little bit better. And again, if it's a good joke and the audience laugh with you, fantastic. But there's a big difference between being a good speaker who tells the occasional joke and a stand-up comedian. So the purpose of a good speaker is to deliver value. If you're a comedian, your job is to make people laugh, and making people laugh is probably one of the most subjective and one of the hardest things in the world to do.
Yeah, because I heard it from a different podcaster, Chris Williamson, who said he was doing a tour at the time and he had a comedian friend who said, "You've got it really much easier than me because you've only got to make the audience laugh like 4 times during your entire speech, where he has to do it like every 30."
Yeah.
I think it was 30, 45. It was definitely less than a minute. He had to make the audience laugh.
Yeah. I went on a course once. I was a member of a voluntary organisation, speakers organisation, and they got a professional speaker, a professional comedian to tell us about the science of humour. And it was really, really interesting. And then everybody was given 2 minutes to get up and tell some jokes. Now, I think occasionally I can be quite funny, but this was really the hardest thing that I feel I've ever done, because you're looking at all these blank faces and you're trying to make them laugh, but they don't. Some of them deliberately aren't budging, and some of the jokes are really bad anyway. So it was not a great experience. But you know what? I think if you can, it was great in a way because it makes you really resilient. Yeah. If you can do 2 minutes of that where you just feel like you're in social quicksand and nobody's laughing, and you just keep giving it your best shot, and you're determined to make them smile at least, and everything after that is easy.
If you're enjoying this episode with Vince Stevenson, then why not give this episode a like? How much of public speaking is about getting the actual speech right?
Well, I think the whole purpose of planning, preparation, and practice is to get the speech right. So, one thing that I'm not keen on, and I discuss this in my classes, one of the things that creates a huge amount of anxiety for people is perfectionism. And what we have, public speaking is a subjective skill. So, I was talking about driving a car earlier. So, if you have crashes regularly, if you can measure that, you can count the number of crashes you have in a year. If it's sort of above one, something's not quite right. So objectivity is purely subjective. So measurement is really important. But when you're trying to measure a subjective skill like public speaking and being a chef, how do you know when it's perfect? What are the criteria for perfection in subjective criteria? I don't know what they are, and I could suggest some criteria, and if somebody disagrees with me, then it's not perfect. So the word perfect works when we're being objective because we can measure it. You know, you go to a pub quiz and you score 100 out of 100, that's a perfect score. Fantastic. But how do you measure who is the best footballer ever? You know, who's the best pop group ever? How do you measure that? It's very difficult because you've got to know what the criteria are. But the criteria aren't out there.
That's a good point. I mean, that puts everything into perspective in terms of subjectivity, because the world's best considered the world's best podcaster at the moment is Joe Rogan. Let's be blunt. And then you've got the best YouTuber in the world, who's YouTube. Well, given his recent controversy, Mr. Beast. I'm not going to get into that, but he's considered. But that's got an actual metric in terms of subscribers and how many views he's done. But I know what you mean. Like, most things you can't is mostly public opinion. It's
Yeah.
not. It's unlike with Mr. Beast and YouTube, where you can actually look at his statistics and his subscriber count. Most people's like, you could honestly argue it's a popularity contest.
Well, I agree with you. It very much depends what the criteria are, and we've all got to. We would all have to. Everybody in the mix would have to agree the criteria, and until the criteria are stated and agreed, and we all agree on them, perfection does not exist in the subjective world. There's a great quotation I use in class. There's a gentleman called Gregory Bateson, who's a very famous anthropologist. He says all of life is subjective, and even objectivity is purely subjective. Let me explain what I mean by that. So we've just had the Olympics, and the Olympic Charter says faster, higher, stronger, longer, heavier. So those are objective measures. But you've got boxing and gymnastics and ice skating and ice dancing and dressage and things like that in the Olympics these days. And you need judges. And what happens now, one of my students a few years ago, well, 2012, she was an Olympic judge in the dressage. And I said, what was that like? I kind of knew the answer. And she said, well, we all get objective criteria. And I said, was there anything interesting about what you put down and what other people put down? Now, considering these are all experts, by the way, experts. And she said, yeah. She said, we all gave different numbers. We all had the best seats in the house, and we all came up with different numbers. So I said, what does that tell you about objectivity? And she said, oh, yeah, it's purely subjective.
Sounds like a paradox.
Well, you can't, if you can't measure it, there's some academics who will tell you if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist.
Did not know any academics would even come to that conclusion.
Well,
Yeah.
there you are. I mean, again, you know, let me just ask you that question again about, you know, who's the best footballer ever? You know, what criteria are we looking at? Now, whoever you ask, you know, if you ask football fans, everyone will have a good idea of who they think. But, you know, you ask somebody who doesn't know a lot about football, and, you know, the top 10, say, probably won't even get in the top 10.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I guess to use your example with the footballers, you could do it with like how many matches they played, how many goals they scored. But then you've got the other positions. It's like, who's the best footballer in the world? So you've got goalkeepers. I mean, how often do they score goals? defenders
Fair
on
enough.
top of that. Yeah, I mean, you could do best striker in the world if you're going to go based on goals scored, sure, but yeah,
But we're an attacking midfielder. How
yeah,
do you measure that? I mean, there's got to be some checks and balances and some nuance in there. And but there's no agreement on these things because football pundits are great because everybody expresses their own opinion. You don't want everybody to agree on who is the best footballer or the best team or this, that, or the other, because success is fleeting. I'm a Manchester United fan, so I know all about fleeting success.
former United fan.
Yeah, it kind of comes and goes. It's not something that sticks around, which is why value is always the best thing to aim for, rather than success. But if you get success, enjoy it.
I had that brief conversation with the football historian Peter Kenny Jones recently, and he said about the waves in football, but I'm digressing. So, how would you tailor your public speaking so where people subjectively like it, or they can, since we can't be objective with it, how would you tailor it to where you win the majority of the crowd?
Okay. Well, like I say, are you talking to me as a trainer? Because being a
Hmm.
trainer is different from being a speaker. So I've always felt that I was a trainer. I was a trainer long before then I got involved in public speaking. And as a trainer, what I'm trying to aim for is to get my students over their next hurdle. Yeah, whatever their problem with public speaking is. And the point I'm going on about objectivity being purely subjective is that perfection is the most subjective word in the book, in the dictionary. And if you are mad about perfection, or if you believe in perfection in the subjective realm, that's going to hold you back because you're never going to get there and you're going to burn yourself out and you're going to feel really crap about yourself, which is like a lot of my students do. And what I try to do to them in a very gentle way, in the opening hour of my work with them, is I try to deconstruct perfectionism because then we could aim for something that would be more objective. Like, if you wanted to be a very good speaker, or if you wanted to be an excellent speaker or an amazing speaker, everyone could come up with some criteria that we could generally agree around there. But you're not, because of the subjective nature of the word perfection, we're not going to agree on perfection because there's just too many variables.
One thing I learned about perfectionism when with the earlier episodes of this podcast was you can be as perfect as you like, but there's always going to be, especially when you're starting out, there's always going to be some error some way. I mean, I used to say for some of my earlier viewers, I used to have a tapestry right behind me, so I don't know whether you know what I'm on about, Vince, but it was basically this like green lake landscape. It was like a fabric poster which was behind me, and then someone pointed out to me, Daniel, this is kind of awful. You need to get rid of it. And then I got rid of it. That got better. Then I've had some equipment failure, which is hence why these are back for this episode.
Yeah.
But I don't think perfection is. I agree with you with perfection is not the way to go because ironically, it's not going to be perfect even if you try to make it perfect.
But if you're worried about being perfect and you don't get there, and every time you trip over your words, suddenly your self-perception, or you're going to want to kick yourself for making that little mistake, which most people will have forgotten 5 seconds in advance anyway, because the audience have got far too many important things to worry about than your little indiscretion or your little whatever, however it came out. So you're talking about your background. If you look at my background there, those are real books and boxes on my shelves there, and they're really untidy. And if anyone wants to complain about my lack of perfectionism, I'm always open to criticism because I don't care. Not in that way. I don't care about my bookcase. I care about lots of other things. I care about my work. I care about my students. I work really, really hard. But little things I don't let those little things bother me. I got life's too important. There's too many big issues to deal with than worrying about the background there.
So how do you help your students overcome perfection?
Well, first of all, I explain to them about objectivity and subjectivity. I also talk to them about there's a thinking mode. It's called sunk cost um, bias, bias, and effectively, imagine being in a bad relationship for many years. And there are times when you're thinking, I need to get out of this relationship. I'm not getting anywhere. This isn't going anywhere. But because you've invested 3 or 4 years in it, you're probably thinking, well, maybe it'll turn around. Maybe things will get better. But the more you put into it, the longer it gets worse. So uh, the problem with perfection is that if you have bought into it, or subjective perfection, if you bought into it and you've been, burning yourself out for it for years, it becomes your best friend and you don't want to lose it because you're familiar with it. And the alternatives of doing something else are probably now too forbidding, too extreme, too much for you to deal with because you've already got your friend perfection. You know its limitations, you know its constraints, and when you're happy with it, you can probably live with it. But being set free and choosing to recalibrate what you're trying to achieve could be quite frightening.
It's also an emotional attachment with the you call it sunk cost bias. I've heard it sunk cost fallacy,
Yeah,
which
that's the one.
which makes it kind of difficult to let go of stuff.
Yeah,
That's something I've had to learn is when things aren't good.
me too. Yeah.
So, what do your students typically come to you for in helps with their public speaking?
Okay. Well, usually what triggers a phone call is so for example, lots of guys, they get married, uh, fathers of the bride, grooms, best men, often come on my course because, some big events coming up. So I mentioned earlier about this idea that what really freaks people out about public speaking is this thought that they're going to diminish themselves in front of their friends, colleagues, or family. And what they don't want to do, of course, is, if you've got like 100, 150 people, who are all there, for the bride and the groom, sharing their beautiful day, you don't want to be the guy who screws up in front of everybody. So, yeah, I get lots of fathers of the bride, lots of grooms, lots of best men. And, they all show up with very, very good hearts. And the idea is, again, it depends how much time I've got to work with them. A day is generally enough. 2 days is fantastic. I run 5-day courses as well. And, people can get really confident and really, really, pick up on the various structures. So wedding speeches are what we call epidactic speeches. That just means they're all about values. So getting married, so the father of the bride, for example, um, you know, he's been married probably, and he's going to talk about the virtues of marriage and family. And that's what everyone shows up for. Everyone, uh, I went to my goddaughter's wedding in Cambridge a few weeks ago, about a month ago, and it was beautiful, really, really beautiful to see this child. I've known her since she was from day zero, and she's 32 now, and she just got married, and really beautiful, smart, PhD student from Cambridge, and I used to babysit for her. It's like the most beautiful thing to see her go through that entire cycle. And now, unfortunately, her dad passed away a few years ago. And but for me, it was great to be there and to see her go through this, transition in her life. Um, Her brother did a great speech for her as kind of not father of the bride, but brother of the bride, and it was really lovely. So it's all, like I say, it's all about values. It's all about family. It's about maybe the next generation. It's really beautiful.
I wouldn't have pictured that you'd get a lot of fathers and
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Because they don't want to screw up in front of their friends and family.
oh yeah, because there's social humiliation if you get that
Yeah,
wrong.
you don't want to be the one who spoils the party.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I'm just shocked that you get so many, but
Oh yeah,
yeah.
plenty.
You've written a few books on public speaking as well. I've got it down here. Oh yeah, The Fear Doctor. Was Anxiety Quick Wins a public speaking book, or is that a different one?
Yeah, it wasn't so much about public speaking. The premise of that book was very much about. So I wrote it during COVID. Now, if you go to the doctor now, or let's say you went to the doctor in 2019 and you said that you felt you got some kind of phobia. Public speaking is a phobia. It's called glossophobia, public speaking phobia. Um, anyway, there's over 500 diagnosed phobias. So if you go to the doctors and say, "Look, doctor, I'm having extreme anxiety about X, Y, and Z," and the doctor says, "Yeah, you've got this, you've got it bad," it's going to take could take anywhere between 9 and 12 months for you to be referred to a specialist. So the premise of the book was, as we just gone into lockdown, what do you do to protect your body and your mind whilst you're waiting for a referral? So so the book is of that premise, and it talks about nutrition, it talks about hydration, it talks about exercise, it talks about doing things that uh, stimulate you intellectually. So, for example, when COVID lockdown came along, my wife and I were very keen gardeners. We're also very keen long distance walkers. I like reading and writing books. For me, during COVID, that first lockdown, I was every day flew by because I was busy. If you remember, we had a beautiful spring and summer in 2020. And my wife and I were out in the garden for hours and hours. And when I wasn't out in the garden, I was reading or writing anxiety quick wins. So that kept me off the streets, although I did a lot of walking on them. But social distancing and all of that. But that kept me mentally stimulated. That for me elevates me, makes me feel good about myself. I like doing creative things. So in a way, I'd like to thank COVID because I got both of my books published during that time. I tried to get The Fear Doctor published previously by myself, but had real problems with the formatting and Kindle, couldn't make it work. But I got some help, and the woman who helped me was superb. So again, yeah, it just all kind of worked out very well.
I wanted to ask about, because you've mentioned on your website and other places about that name, Fear Doctor. Where has
Mm.
that come from?
Right. Well, do you know what the idea behind that was? So there's, Mr. Motivator.
What?
There's a celebrity. He's a Jamaican guy, I think, and he's kind of middle aged, and he does all these really good workout routines for middle aged people. Mr. Motivator.
Never heard of him.
Okay. There's a woman called Supergran as well, who teaches parents how to be better parents. Yeah.
Right.
Now, I don't know Mr. Motivator's name, and I don't know Supergran's name. Most people can't remember Vincent Stevenson. It's too many syllables. So I just went for a marketing name, The Fear Doctor. And you know what? It's been really good. People can't remember my name, but they can remember The Fear Doctor. And they just search on Google and they find me. It's great.
So I love that. I love how you've just done it because your name's got too many
Yeah.
syllables.
No disrespect to people, but it's too many syllables to remember.
Okay. I don't know how to not process that. I don't know what to make out of that. It's like,
Well, just that was my reason for choosing a marketing name.
oh, fair enough.
It's been really good.
No, I mean, if it's helped you, it's helped you. I
Yeah,
can't really knock that. I'm just more shocked that that's the reason.
yeah, yeah.
If you're still enjoying this episode with Vince Stevenson, or better known as the Fear Doctor, since you've already given this episode a like, why not leave a comment as well? Is it true with public speaking that you should not say, I mean, I've done a few times in this conversation where you say stuff like, like,
So there are lots of ahs, right, core blimey, blah blah blahs, etc., etc., and all of that. So we have these verbal fillers. They don't really yield a great deal of value. So my suggestion to my students is if we can replace them with a natural silence, that will make you look and feel and sound to the audience more articulate. And what we're trying to do as we dive in and delve into public speaking, if you want to be noted to be a good speaker, there's got to be rhythm, there's got to be fluency, and there's got to be articulacy. So that's what we're aiming for.
I haven't double checked this study, but I read somewhere that they tested uh, they tested people's perceptions of different people depending on how they spoke. So they brought one of them was
Mhm.
I believe he was a tenured professor. Another
Mhm.
one was like a newbie to the college, university. I can't remember where they did it. Another one was just some random bloke or so, just a nobody.
Yeah.
And they had them speak. They had the professor say, also, that he was basically just screwing it up. The new guy was a lot more articulate, but wasn't perfect. And the nobody was what you said about the silence. And
Mhm.
they asked the students who listened to all three of the talks what did they think of each other person, and they rated the nobody better than the professor because he
Mhm.
just knew how to shut up basically in between the fillers.
Yeah. Well, perception is a really coming back to what we were saying about perfection. Perception and the way perception comes about for each and every individual in its subjective way. It's no wonder that we have this thing, we call it the illusion of unanimity, that we all kind of, you think that we'd all agree on a great deal of many things, but when you put certain ideas to people, they just fundamentally disagree with you. You know, that we've got cultures, creeds, religions. We all have kind of different value systems. And so my wife, for example, she's Brazilian, and she's great. But you know, our first few years together, we had a lot of misunderstandings, linguistic misunderstandings. We still do, and as long as a bedrock of love underneath everything you're doing, you're okay. But if that bedrock isn't there, it could get really annoying.
I suppose if you're not both putting in the effort as well, or just anyone in general, if you're
Well,
not meeting people halfway, because I know what you mean with the opinion thing. Apparently, there was Harvard did this study where they took people with very strong opinions and they
mm,
tried to give them the actual facts, and this wasn't like opinion based facts. It was stuff.
fact,
Yeah, like I think someone might think this. I mean, granted they're colorblind, but someone might think the sky is pink when it's blue.
mm.
Those sort of facts, and they tried to give them the actual facts, because the beliefs were so built up in their head. They were like, no, 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 no.
Oh well, the thing, you know, we have these. You know, these theories, these crazy theories that people have. I'm just trying to think of the word. What's the, you know, the Flat Earth Society? What are they called? They begins with an R, if I can remember it.
No
You know,
idea.
right. So belief system. Just because you believe something doesn't mean that it's true. It just means that you believe it. So, do you remember when you were a kid? Do you remember Father Christmas? Did you believe in Father Christmas?
Yep.
Yeah. And again, this is an interesting one for children. It just shows you how vulnerable children are because, you know, if mum and dad are telling you about Father Christmas, even though he doesn't exist, now there are some professors out there in the world who'll tell you that, you know, what they're telling you about Father Christmas is child abuse because you shouldn't be manipulating them. I just feel that, you know, you can give people a day off around Christmas, around manipulation. It's kind of done for kind of beautiful reasons and making beautiful childhoods and things like that. Yes, there are people out there who can take advantage of those things, but yeah, it whatever you believe, it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. It just means that you believe it. But what happens is you stack up these beliefs and they become a system and they can become like an impenetrable boulder getting in the way of the rest of your thinking, and that's really going to hold you back. And I've seen that many times.
Can you give any examples of that?
there was a woman. Again, there's a little case study in the Fear Doctor, and this woman, she'd been very successful. She'd worked in big banks. She'd worked for some, civil service, some big NGOs. She'd held very senior positions, but as she was reaching her 50s, she felt like she wasn't being listened to by her younger colleagues. She felt like they were going to show her the door, and she was just making all of this up. So everyone went home, and she just said, "Can I have a chat with you?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So we had a chat, and she told me about all of these things, and I just said, have you ever seen any emails or text messages about you in these things? And she said, no. I said, have you ever heard anybody talking about these things? She said, no. And really, she was just making it all up. And, but it was making her very emotional. She was saying that, she felt like she wasn't being included in meetings and she wasn't being briefed like she used to be. And I said, you got any evidence of that? And she said, well, no, it's just a feeling. And if you go through that feeling a million times a day, it's going to look very real. So she changed jobs, and she contacted me, and she said, I'm working with a really great team. Everyone's wonderful. And she was back on top of the world. And everything that had gone before that last couple of years, that horrible experience, but it was of her own making, I believe, because she didn't have any evidence to show for any of what she was saying, which is kind of sad that she was. And this is what anxiety does, by the way. Anxiety, there's a difference between fear and anxiety. Fear is about a very real physical threat to your life and body, and it invokes the sympathetic nervous system. And those are the things that I was talking about earlier, the clammy hands, the profuse sweating, the tightness, dryness in the throat. These are the physiological manifestations of a panic attack. But what fear is trying to do is trying to protect you. You're going to have to run or fight to get out of that situation. Yeah, it's a dangerous situation. Anxiety, on the other hand, is always thought generated. It's what we do to ourselves through the power of thought. So think about, asking somebody on a date it can be quite risky, because if you get a no, that could be quite upsetting for you, especially if you really like that person. And let's say you get a yes and you go on, you get the date, and now you're anxious again because you're thinking, how's this date going to go? I really like this person. I want it to go really, really well. But the thing in life is you got to be in it to win it. Job interviews are a cracking source of anxiety, because you can have a great CV, you can have magnificent experience, you can have the best answers, you can be incredibly articulate on that day and answer the questions magnificently, and there's no guarantee you're going to get the job. But the thing is, you've got to be in it to win it. And the thing about anxiety, the thing about life, is that sometimes we have to take these risks. We've got to take these risks because when you get the winning outcome, those are the things that make life really valuable, worthwhile, successful. Like, having a life partner, that's important. Having a job that you love, maybe, having a family that you've always wanted. These are the things, on our deathbed, these are the things that we'll be thinking about. We're not going to be thinking about my PhD from Cambridge. Not going to be thinking about my football medals. I'm going to be thinking about the people sitting around the bed who love me. Those are the things that really matter to people. But like I say, you've got to be in it to win it. You've probably got to ask a few people out before you meet the right person. And thankfully, um, if you've had a few setbacks, when you do meet the right person, you're going to be in the right situation to acquit yourself.
Yeah, it's you've only got to succeed once, isn't it? You can fail 10 times, but the 11th one's a banger, and you succeed with
Yeah,
whatever. I'm not going to pick an example. Well, all you need is the one time.
yeah. I had lots of quite a number of girlfriends before I met my wife, and those things didn't work out. But when my wife came along, I think, and again, I knew within a couple of weeks of meeting my wife to be that this is the one, and all of those kind of upsetting or negative experiences were all part of the big plan, so that when I did meet my wife, I'd be free. Two, she thankfully was free as well, and we could get on with it. It was great. But like I say, you've got to be in it to win it. If you go into situations with a closed mind, or you're not totally convinced by what you're doing, you're always going to hang back.
We'll get back to talking to Vince Stevenson or the Fear Doctor in just one moment. But first, since you've already liked and commented on this episode, why not subscribe to the main channel as well? So how can people use that constant failure and that one success to help them with their public speaking?
Well, like I said, I'm just using those as analogies, really. I'm not necessarily saying that they're springboards to being a great public speaker. I'm saying that those are um, activities that do trigger anxiety in the individual, because you can't guarantee the outcome. That's what triggers anxiety, the thought that you won't be able to trigger the outcome. Professional sportsmen, we just had the Olympics. Those athletes, they'll spend 5, 6, 7 hours a day practicing, and they want to win. They want to win, but there are other people trying to beat them. Yeah. Life's very competitive, and we've got to be up for it every day. I mean, we were having a discussion in class a few weeks ago about motivation, and there were some very nice but very young people, and I said, well, just once you've got your first mortgage, believe me, you're going to be very motivated. Yeah, that will really, yeah. When you're young, if you're living with your parents, or if you've been a student and you've been living in your student accommodation, uh, yeah, when you get that first mortgage, that's more than enough motivation for most people to get out of bed at 6:30 and go and do a day's work. I've been doing it. I've been doing that since I was 18. So yeah, it's that's life. And motivation, again, when you get a life partner, if you have children, don't worry about motivation. It just seems to come from nowhere.
I know what you mean, it's burn the boats.
Yeah. Well, you got to be in it to win it. You don't marry someone. You don't have children with somebody with the thought that, oh well, maybe I'll abandon them next week. That's not very fair to anybody. So no, I mean, if you're going to be in it, be in it to win it.
So what makes a great public speaker, and what makes them go or aim to win it?
Okay, well, it's for me, like I say, it's like anything. If you're a sportsman, you don't want to be a sportsman who loses. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that everyone is highly competitive athletically. You see guys and women of all shapes and sizes jogging, and that's great. I'm a certain shape and size as well, and yeah, we're all doing our best to try and keep healthy, stay fit, and things like that. I think that's really, really great. With regards to public speaking, what makes a good speaker, I think, is being relevant. I think sharing value. I think there's a thing in public speaking, again, there's a lot of Greek words coming from Aristotle's time, the word called kairos, and that just means being timely. So, for example, I've been doing classroom work on public speaking, the fear of public speaking now for 20 years, but what I teach people has been changing over the years. And what I try to do is introduce topical issues that would pique people's interest. So I can use various case studies and situations where people they'd be relevant and people would know what I'm talking about. So it's kind of like a constant mix of influences. One, trying to be timely. That's where Kairos comes in. Try to be timely, try to be topical, try and keep it up to date where it's possible. But rhetoric, for example, ethos, logos, pathos, has been around I think it's been around long before the ancient Greeks, actually. I think it's just Aristotle put it into a framework that most people could understand. And It's one of the things that I talk about as well. Again, just trying to build rapport with people. If you want to influence people, you've got to be in rapport with them. And there's some very, you know, simple ways of going about that. So, being respectful, talking to people. You and I have never met. When I got your invitation, I thought, who's this guy? I've never heard of him. And you probably never heard of me until you stumbled across me. And I thought, well, I did over 200 podcasts during COVID, and I loved it. Like I say, it kept me intellectually stimulated, kept me meeting people, having really nice conversations like this, and it was great. So yeah, I'm delighted to be here. So being respectful, being humble, showing humility, um, being sincere in what you're saying and doing, and being empathetic if required. It's not always necessary, but again, those are four very good, simple ways of whoever you're talking to, wherever you're talking to them. If you want to build rapport, those are four very good building blocks.
Vince Stevenson, everyone, or should I say your marketing name, Fear Doctor. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you, or perhaps get some of your books?
Well, if you want to find out a bit more about me, so you can just search for the Fear Doctor. I also run a company. It's called the College of Public Speaking.co.uk. That's the website. And my books, The Fear Doctor and Anxiety Quick Wins, are on Kindle. And buy them soon because the price keeps going up. They came out very reasonably priced, but they're selling reasonably well. So I'm really delighted about that because I was discussing this with. If you want to be a good speaker, by the way, read a lot and write a lot and speak a lot. And when you write a book, you don't just write it once, you write it about 10 times because you're constantly doing revisions and improvements. And it's a great experience, but there's also that moment when you feel, I've had enough of this. I just want it published. And it's kind of a lovely feeling, but you've got to let your babies go, as it were. And yeah, it's great. But the more you read about your own subject, the more those ideas crystallize in your brain. And yeah, so the Fear Doctor, just a very quick point. So talks about public speaking delivery, i.e., posture, breathing, those kind of things, body language, facial expressions. That's really important. But I think the other thing as well is the message, getting the right message for the right audience. And public speaking, by the way, is always about the audience. I know it looks like it's about you, but it's actually about the audience.
No, I understand. That's the thing with being a producer. You're not making it for you. You're making it for other people.
That's right. You are not your own audience.
If you enjoyed this episode with Vince Stevenson, or better known as the Fear Doctor, and you want to level up your vocals for your public speaking, then you will enjoy my conversation with Nick Farina right here. But if you want something completely different, then I have Ivan Weiss, who is a headshot photographer, right here. I'll see you there.